The stars had never seemed so cold to the survivors of the Lullaby. Captain Mira Okonkwo pulled herself through the twisted metal corridors of what remained of her ship, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air that leaked from 1,000 tiny cracks in the hull. 3 days ago, the Lullaby had been a proud vessel, carrying 217 souls away from the plague that had consumed their colony. World now, it was a tune drifting through the most dangerous region of known space. The Scorian Nebula belonged to the Drakari Empire, and the Drakari did not welcome visitors. Everyone in the galaxy knew the stories about them. They were ancient beings who had mastered space travel when humanity was still learning to make fire. They stood 12 feet tall with scales harder than starship armor and eyes that burned like dying suns. They breathed plasma and lived for thousands of years, and they had absolutely no tolerance for other species entering their territory. The punishment for trespassing was always the same: death. Myra found another body in the medical bay and forced herself to keep moving. She could not save the dead, but she might still save the living. A sound reached her ears through the groaning metal of the dying ship. It was soft and quiet and completely out of place in this frozen nightmare. Someone was singing. Myra followed the sound through a shattered doorway and into the cargo hold that had been converted into an emergency shelter. There, among the huddled survivors wrapped in thermal blankets and pressed together for warmth, she found the source of the singing. A little girl sat alone in the corner. She was perhaps 7 years old, with dark, curly hair and brown skin that had gone pale from the cold. Her name was Alara Vance, and Mira remembered her from the passenger manifest. Parents had been doctors who had volunteered to stay behind and treat the sick while making sure their daughter escaped. They had died getting her to the ship now. Alara sat with her back against the wall and her arms wrapped around something large and oval-shaped. She was singing a lullaby to it. Myra moved closer, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw what the child was holding. It was an egg, but not just any egg. The shell was covered in scales that shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue. Faint patterns of gold traced across its surface like veins of precious metal. Heat radiated from somewhere inside it, but that heat was fading. It was a Drakari egg. Mira dropped to her knees beside the girl. Alara, where did you find that? She whispered. The child looked up at her with eyes that were tired but determined. It was in the other ship, Alara said quietly. The one we hit when we fell out of the jump. Myra remembered the collision. A smaller vessel had appeared out of nowhere just as the Lullaby dropped out of hyperspace with failing engines. The impact had killed dozens and sent both ships spinning into the nebula. There were cages in that ship, Alara continued. Lots of eggs in cages, and they were all broken except this one, and it fell through the hole into our ship, and it was crying. Crying? Myra asked. Not with sound, the girl said, but I could feel it in here. She touched her chest right over her heart. It was scared and alone. And it was getting cold, so I picked it up and I held it, and I've been keeping it warm ever since. Myra stared at the child in disbelief. For 3 days, while the ship froze around them, while adults panicked and fought over the remaining supplies, this 7-year-old girl had been using her own body heat to keep a Drakari egg alive. The egg should have died within hours without proper incubation. But here it was still glowing faintly, still holding on to life, because a human child had refused to let it go. Alara, Myra said carefully, do you know what kind of egg that is? It belongs to the dragon people. Alara said, I saw pictures of them in school, and they looked scary, but this egg is not scary. She hugged it tighter. It is just a baby that has not been born yet, and babies should not die alone in the dark. Before Myra could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Emergency lights that had been flickering for days suddenly went dark, and then blazed. Rita sound filled the air like thunder rolling across a metal sky. Through the cracked viewport, Mira saw them Drakari warships. They were enormous vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built with hulls of dark scales and engines that burned like captured stars. There were 7 of them surrounding the crippled lullaby like wolves circling wounded prey. The largest ship opened like a living mouth, and something emerged. It was a Drakari warrior in full battle armor. He was massive, even by the standards of his species. With scales of deep crimson and eyes that glowed like molten gold, he flew through the void without a ship of his own, carried by wings that spread wide enough to block out the stars. More warriors followed him. They cut through the hull of the lullaby like it was paper, and within minutes they were inside. Myra put herself between the warriors and the survivors, but she knew it was pointless. A human could not fight a Drakari, any more than an ant could fight a hurricane. The Crimson Warrior landed in front of her and looked down with an expression that might have been contempt or might have been curiosity. "Humans," he said in a voice like grinding stone, "you have entered sacred space, and for this you will face the judgment of the Queen." His eyes moved past Mira and found Alara still sitting in the corner, still holding the egg. Something changed in his expression. The contempt disappeared, and something else took its place. Shock, perhaps, or confusion, or something deeper that Myra could not name. The warrior moved toward the child, and Mira tried to stop him, but another Drakari grabbed her and held her back. Alara looked up at the massive creature standing over her, and she did not scream or cry or try to run. Instead, she held the egg closer and spoke in a voice that was small but steady. "Please do not hurt it," she said. "It has been trying so hard to stay alive, and I promised I would keep it safe." The Crimson Warrior stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his soldiers and gave an order in the harsh language of the Drakari. Did not understand the words, but she understood the result. The warriors did not kill them. Instead, they gathered all the survivors and brought them aboard the Drakari flagship. Alara was taken separately along with the egg. She was brought to a special chamber that was warm and filled with soft light, and a Drakari medic examined the egg without taking it from her arms. When the medic finished, she said something to the Crimson Warrior, and he looked at Alara with an expression that Mira had never seen on a Drakari face before. It looked almost like respect. "The egg lives because of you, small one," he said. "This should not be possible, and yet it is true." He knelt down so that his burning eyes were level with hers. "The Queen will decide your fate, but I will tell her what you have done, and perhaps that will matter." Alara nodded and held the egg close. "I just did not want it to be alone," she said. The warrior stared at her for a moment longer. Then he stood and walked away, and the ship began its journey toward the heart of the Drakari Empire, toward the Throne of Cinders, toward a meeting that would change the fate of 2 civilizations forever. Tarathian Prime was a world of fire and shadow. The planet burned with the heat of 1,000 volcanoes, and rivers of molten rock carved paths through mountains of black glass. The sky was the color of blood and ash, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained fury. This was the heart of the Drakari Empire. This was where their queen had ruled for 4,000 years. Ship carrying Alara descended through the burning clouds and landed on a platform of obsidian that jutted out from the side of the largest mountain on the planet. The Crimson Warrior, whose name she had learned, was Commander. Krezith lifted her from the ship and carried her across the platform. Because the stone was too hot for human feet, he had not spoken to her during the journey, but he had made sure she was fed and warm, and that no one tried to take the egg from her arms. Now, as they approached the massive doors of the royal palace, he stopped and looked down at her. "Listen to me carefully, small one," he said. "You are about to stand before Queen Cirith, the Undying, and she has not spoken to a creature outside our species in 400 years." Alara looked up at him with wide eyes, but she did not seem afraid. "Is she nice?" she asked. Krezith made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. "She is the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy," he said. She has destroyed entire civilizations, and she has lived longer than your species has existed. But is she nice?" Alara asked again. The commander stared at her for a moment, and something in his expression softened just a little. "I do not know," he admitted. "No one has ever asked that question before." The doors opened, and Krazith carried Alara into the throne room. It was the largest space she had ever seen. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above, and the walls were lined with pillars of black stone that seemed to drink in the light flames, burned in enormous braziers, casting dancing shadows across the floor. And at the far end of the room, sitting upon a throne made of volcanic glass and dragon bones, was Queen Sirith herself. She was ancient and terrible and beautiful, all at once. Her scales were the color of the void between stars, so dark they seemed to absorb everything around them. Her eyes burned with golden fire that had watched empires rise and fall for millennia. Her wings were folded against her back, but even folded, they seemed to fill the space around her with their presence. She was easily 3 times the size of Commander Krazith, and when she moved even slightly, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Beside her stood dozens of Drakari nobles and advisors and warriors. They all turned to look as Krazith entered carrying the human child. The whispers began immediately. "A human," someone hissed in the throne room. "This is an insult to the crown," another voice added. "They should both be burned for this violation." "Kill the creature and be done with it," a third noble demanded, "and destroy that corrupted egg along with it." Krazith ignored them all and walked straight to the base of the throne, where he knelt and sat Alara gently on the ground. The stone here was cooler, and she was able to stand on her own. She looked up at the massive queen, and the queen looked down at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sirith leaned forward, and her voice filled the room like distant thunder. "Commander Krazith," she said, "explain to me why there is a human child standing in my throne room holding one of our eggs." Krazith kept his head bowed as he spoke. "Your Majesty, this child was found aboard a wrecked human vessel that drifted into our space 3 days ago, and you brought her here alive because..." The Queen asked. "Because of what she did, Your Majesty," Krazith said. "The human ship collided with a slaver vessel carrying stolen eggs." A murmur ran through the court at the mention of slavers. "All the eggs were destroyed in the collision except one," Krazith continued. "It fell into the human ship and it was dying from the cold." He looked up at the queen. "This child found it, and for 3 days she used her own body to keep it warm, and she saved its life." The court erupted. "Impossible," one advisor shouted. "A human cannot bond with a Drakari egg. She probably damaged it," another added. "The hatchling will be deformed or worse." "This is a trick of some kind," a warrior growled. "Humans are known for their deception." Through all of this, Alara stood quietly and held the egg close. She was scared, now truly scared, but she did not run and she did not cry. She just held onto the egg and waited. Queen Sirith raised one massive claw, and the court fell silent. She rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood directly in front of El Queen was so large that she blocked out everything else in the room. Her shadow fell over the child like night falling over a small flower. "Look at me, little human," Sirith commanded. Alara raised her head and met the burning golden eyes of the Dragon Queen. "My advisors tell me that you should die," Sirith said. "They say your species is a plague upon the galaxy, and that you have no right to touch our sacred children." She leaned closer until Alara could feel the heat radiating from her scales. "They say I should take that egg from you and cast you into the fires below this mountain." Alara swallowed hard, but she did not look away. "What do you say to this?" the queen asked. For a moment, Alara was quiet. Then she spoke in a voice that was small but clear. "I think they are wrong about the egg being scared of me," she said, "because it is not scared, and I can feel that it is happy when I hold it." She looked down at the egg in her arms, and I think I should not die just for helping someone who needed help. She looked back up at the Queen. Where I come from, we are taught that if you can help someone, you should, even if they are different from you. Even if helping them might cost you your life, Sirith asked. Yes, Alara said simply. That is what my mom and dad did, and that is what I will do too. Something changed in the Queen's expression. It was so subtle that most of the court did not notice it, but Krazith noticed, and he felt his heart begin to beat faster. Commander Krazith tells me you were found singing to the egg, Sirith said. Why? Alara shrugged her small shoulders. It was scared at first when I found it, she said. And when I was little and I was scared, my mom would sing to me, and it always made me feel better. So I thought maybe it would help the egg too. And did it help? The Queen asked. I think so, Alara said. It stopped feeling so scared after a while, and it started feeling more like it was. Sleeping peacefully, Sirith stared at the child for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Krazith first sent his report. Why did you do it? She asked. Why did you nearly die to save an egg from a species that would most likely kill you for touching it? Alara looked up at her with eyes that held no deception and no fear. Because it was alone, she said. And it was cold, and I could help. She hugged the egg tighter. No one should have to die alone in the dark, especially not a baby that has not even been born yet. Queen Sirith, the Undying, who had not been moved by anything in 1,000 years, felt something stir deep in her ancient heart. Something she had almost forgotten existed. She looked at this tiny, fragile human child who had risked everything to save a life that was not her own, and she made a decision that would change everything. The child will live, she announced. The court exploded into chaos, but Sirith silenced them with a single look. She will remain here as a ward of my throne until her people come to claim her, if they ever do. She looked down at Alara, and the egg will stay with her, for it seems they have already chosen each other. Alara looked up at the dragon, Queen, with tears forming in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Scythe turned and returned to her throne. But as she sat down, she glanced back at the small human child standing alone in the great hall holding a dragon egg in her arms, and for the first time in 400 years, Queen Sirith smiled. The weeks that followed were unlike anything the Drakari Empire had ever witnessed. Lara was given a room in the royal palace with special cooling systems installed, so that she would not burn in the volcanic heat of Parathian. Prime servants were assigned to bring her food and water and anything else she needed. But the thing she needed most was already with her. The egg never left her side. The royal physicians had examined it thoroughly, and what they found amazed them. When Alara was near the egg, its vital signs grew stronger, and its shell became brighter, and the golden patterns on its surface glowed with warm light. When she was taken away even for a short time, the egg began to fade, its heat decreased, and its glow dimmed, and the physicians could detect something like distress emanating from within it. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. The egg had bonded with a human commander. Krazith was assigned to watch over Alara, and he found himself spending more time with her than he had ever spent with any non-Drakarish. Was curious about everything. She asked questions constantly about the palace and the planet and the history of the Drakari people. She wanted to know how their ships worked, and what they ate, and whether they played games and had families and celebrated holidays. At first, Krazith answered her questions with short, cold responses. But there was something about this child that made it difficult to stay distant. She was so earnest and so eager to learn, and she never seemed to judge or fear him, even though he was a warrior who had killed hundreds in battle. One day, she asked him why the Drakari did not like humans. Krazith considered the question carefully. We do not dislike humans specifically, he said. We dislike all other species equally. But why? Alara asked. Because other species are weak, Krazith explained. They live short lives, and they fight among themselves, and they spread across the galaxy like weeds, taking resources and causing problems wherever they go. That seems sad. Elara said. Krazith tilted his head. Sad, he repeated. Yes. Elara said, it must be lonely to think everyone else is weak and not worth knowing. She looked up at him with those strange, soft human eyes. Do you ever get lonely, Commander Krazith? The warrior had no answer for that. As time passed, word spread through the Empire about the human child and her impossible bond with the egg Simdrakari. Were curious and came to see her from distant worlds. Others were furious and demanded that the Queen end this disgrace immediately. But Queen Sirith remained firm. She had her reasons, though she shared them with no one. What she did not tell anyone was that she had begun watching Elara through the palace surveillance system. She watched as the child sang to the egg every night before sleep. She watched as Elara learned to read the Drakari language and practiced writing it with clumsy but determined hands. She watched as the child befriended the servants who brought her meals, treating them with the same kindness she showed everyone else regardless of their rank or status, and she watched as Elara sat by the windows looking out at the volcanic landscape and telling the egg stories about a planet called Earth Stories, about blue oceans and white clouds, and something called snow, which was frozen water that fell from the sky, stories about animals called dogs and cats and birds and butterflies, stories about her parents who had been doctors and who had died so that she could live. Sirith found herself listening to these stories with growing fascination. The human world sounded impossible. So much water and so many different forms of life and temperatures that ranged from burning hot to freezing cold, and yet somehow this small, fragile species had survived there and thrived there and eventually reached out to the stars. Perhaps they were not as weak as the Drakari had always believed. On the 49th day, something remarkable happened. Elara woke in the middle of the night to a sound like glass cracking. She sat up and looked at the egg and gasped. A thin line had appeared along its surface. The shell was breaking. She held the egg gently and watched as more cracks spread across its surface like lightning. Frozen in time, light poured out from within, golden and warm and beautiful. And then a piece of shell fell away and something moved inside. A small head emerged. It was covered in scales that shimmered between silver and white like moonlight on water. Tiny wings unfolded from a body no larger than a house. Cat eyes opened, and they were the deepest blue Elara had ever seen, like the oceans. She had told so many stories about. The hatchling looked up at her and made a sound that was somewhere between a chirp and a purr. And in that moment, Elara felt something click into place in her heart. It was like a door opening to a room she never knew existed. She could feel the hatchling's emotions as clearly as her own joy and curiosity, and something that could only be described as love. The bond was complete. Servants came running when they heard Elara calling out with excitement. They found her sitting on her bed with a newly hatched drake curled in her lap, purring contentedly as she stroked its silver scales. Within the hour, the news had reached Queen Sirith. She came to see for herself, and what she found stopped her in her tracks. Hatchling was perfect. There was no deformity, no weakness, no sign of the corruption that her advisors had predicted. If anything, the young drake seemed stronger and healthier than most newborns, and it was completely, utterly bonded to the human child. When Sirith approached, the hatchling did not cower or show submission as young drakes normally did before the queen. Instead, it lifted its head and looked at her with calm, curious eyes. Then it looked at Elara and pressed its head against her cheek, and Elara giggled and wrapped her arms around it. "I am going to name you Valith," she said. "It means moonlight in your language, and you look like moonlight, the newly named." Valith chirped happily and curled tighter in her lap. Sirith watched this scene and felt something shift inside her. For 12,000 years, the Drakari had believed that they were the supreme species in the galaxy. They had believed that their power and their longevity and their ancient traditions made them better than everyone else. But here was proof that they had been wrong. The human child had done something no Drakari could do. She had bonded With a dying egg through nothing but warmth and kindness and love, she had brought it back from the edge of death and helped it hatch into a healthy, beautiful drake. And she had done it not for power or glory or any kind of reward. She had done it simply because she could not bear to let something helpless die alone. Sireth returned to her throne that night and sat in silence for a long time. She thought about all the species her empire had conquered and destroyed over the millennia. She thought about all the lives that had been ended because the Drakari believed they were superior, and she wondered for the first time in her very long life if perhaps they had been making a terrible mistake. The humans were weak, yes, they lived such brief lives and their bodies were so fragile, but there was something in them that the Drakari had lost somewhere along the way, something precious. Something that could save a dying dragon with nothing but low. Sireth did not know what to do with this knowledge yet, but she knew that things could never go back to the way they were before. The child had changed everything. Somehow the Dragon Queen was grateful for it. 3 years had passed since the lullaby crashed into Drakari space. Lara was 10 years old now, and she had grown in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She could speak the Drakari language fluently, and she had learned their history and their customs and their laws. She had made friends among the servants, and even among some of the younger nobles who had been curious enough to speak with her despite the disapproval of their elders. And Valeth had grown as well. The silver drake was now the size of a large horse with wings that could carry both of them soaring through the volcanic skies of Parathian Prime. Their bond had only deepened over the years. They could communicate without words, sharing emotions and images and sometimes even thoughts across the connection that linked their minds. Alara was happy in a way she had not expected to be. She still missed her parents, and she still dreamed of Earth, and she still wondered if she would ever see another human being again. But she had found a home here in this strange, fiery world among these ancient, powerful creatures who had slowly begun to accept her. And then the Terran Confederacy came. The news arrived on a morning like any other. A fleet of human warships had been detected at the edge of the Scorian Nebula. They were not a massive armada, just 12 vessels, but they flew the flag of the Terran Confederacy, and they were demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. They wanted their people back. The survivors of the lullaby had been kept in comfortable quarters on one of Parathion Prime's moons, and they had been treated well enough, but they were still prisoners, and everyone knew it. The Drakari War Council convened immediately, and Alara was not invited. But Valeth was able to show her what was happening through their bond. The council chamber was filled with the most powerful military leaders in the Empire. They stood around a massive holographic display showing the human fleet, and they argued about what to do. "We should destroy them immediately," one general growled. 12 ships are nothing against our forces, and it will send a message to the rest of their species." "I agree," another added. "The humans have been spreading across the galaxy like insects for too long, and this is the perfect opportunity to remind them of their place. We could conquer their core worlds within a decade." A third voice suggested, "They have resources we could use, and their population would make excellent servants." Commander Krazeth stood silent in the corner listening to the debate. He had spent 3 years watching Alara and Valeth grow together, and he had seen things that made him question everything he had been taught about other species. But he was just a commander, and his voice carried little weight in this council. Queen Sireth sat on her throne at the head of the chamber and listened to her advisors argue. Her expression was unreadable as always. Finally, she raised a claw, and the room fell silent. "We will send a response to the human fleet," she said. "We will tell them that their people are alive, and that we will discuss terms for their return." "Your Majesty," one general protested, "this is weakness, and they will." "I did not ask for your opinion, General Vraxis," Sireth interrupted coldly. "I gave an order." The general bowed his head and stepped back, but Alara could feel through Valith that the Queen's decision had made many in the council very unhappy over the following. Day's tensions continued to rise. The human fleet remained at the edge of the nebula, waiting for a response. The Drakari military began preparing for war, gathering ships and weapons and soldiers from across the Empire, and the council continued to pressure the Queen to take aggressive action. Elora knew she had to do something. She had heard the whispers in the palace about how the war would go. The Drakari were vastly more powerful than the humans, and a conflict would end quickly with devastating losses on one side. Her side, all those people on those 12 ships would die, and then the Drakari would turn their attention to the rest of human space. Everything her parents had died for would be destroyed. She went to Commander Krazith and asked him to arrange an audience with the Queen. Krazith looked at her for a long moment. "You understand that the Queen is dealing with matters of Empire right now," he said. "She may not have time for—" "Please, Commander," Alara said. "This is important, and I think I can help." Something in her voice made Krazith pause. This was not the frightened little girl he had found clutching an egg 3 years ago. This was someone who had grown and learned, and who carried herself with a quiet strength that reminded him of the Queen herself. He nodded and went to make the request. To his surprise, Sirith agreed to see how Alara walked into the throne room with Valith at her side. The silver drake had grown too large to be carried now, and she walked beside Alara like a guardian made of moonlight and scales. The Queen watched them approach, and something flickered in her golden eyes. "Alara Vance," she said. "You wish to speak with me?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Alara said, and she bowed the way she had learned was proper. "I wanted to talk to you about the human fleet." "And what could a child possibly have to say about matters of war?" Sirith asked. "I want to ask you not to destroy them," Alara said simply. A murmur ran through the advisors who stood along the walls. "The council believes war is inevitable," Sirith said. "Your people have entered our space, and they will not leave without. They're colonists, and we cannot appear weak by simply handing them over." "What if there was another way?" Alara asked. She took a deep breath and spoke from her heart. "Your Majesty, I have lived among your people for 3 years now, and I have learned so much about you, and I have seen how strong and proud and ancient the Drakari are." She paused. "But I have also seen something else, and I do not think you know it is there." "And what is that?" Sirith asked. "Loneliness." Alara said. The throne room went completely silent. "You have ruled for 4,000 years," Alara continued, "and in all that time you have conquered and destroyed and built an empire that spans 1,000 worlds. But have you ever had a friend?" Sirith stared at her. "Have you ever sat with someone who was not afraid of you and just talked?" Alara asked. "Have you ever had someone who cared about you, not because of your power, but just because of who you are?" She reached out and put her hand on Velith's neck. "I know what it feels like to be alone," she said. "After my parents died, I thought I would never feel connected to anyone ever again. But then I found Valith, and now I cannot imagine my life without her." Valith pressed her head against Alara's shoulder and rumbled softly. "The humans out there in those ships are not your enemies," Alara said. "They are scared, and they are worried about their families, and they came all this way because they love the people on that ship, the same way I love Valith." She looked up at the Queen. "You could destroy them, and you could conquer our worlds, and you would win every battle, but you would still be alone." She took a step forward. "Or you could try something different, and you could let them see who you really are, and maybe you would not be alone anymore." Queen Sirith sat motionless on her throne. The advisors waited for her to dismiss this foolish child and ordered the fleet to attack, but the dismissal never came. Instead, the Dragon Queen rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood before Alara. She was silent for a long time. She finally spoke. Her voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "You ask if I have ever had a friend," she said. She looked at Alara and then at Valith. "I believe I have one now." She turned to face her council. "There will be no war," she announced. "We will meet with the humans, and we will find another path." The council erupted in protest, but Sura silenced them with a look. "I've spoken," she said, "and my word is law." She looked back at Alara. "You will come with me to meet your people, little one," she said, "and together we will see if this galaxy is ready for something new." The Drakari flagship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Scorian Nebula, and the human fleet immediately went to high alert, weapons charged and shields activated, and thousands of sailors prepared for what they believed would be their final battle. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the Terran vessel Resolute and watched the massive alien ship approach. He had commanded fleets for 30 years, and he had fought in a dozen campaigns across the galaxy, but he had never faced the Dracarino. Human had and survived. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the Drakari vessel." On screen, Chun ordered. The main display flickered, and an image appeared. It was a Drakari, unlike anything any human had ever seen. Her scales were black as the void, and her eyes burned with ancient golden fire, and her presence seemed to fill the entire screen. "I am Queen Surith of the Drakari Empire," she said, "and I wish to speak with whoever leads your fleet." Chun straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "I am Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Confederacy," he said. "We have come to retrieve our people." "Your Majesty, I am aware of why you have come," Surith replied, "but before we discuss that matter, I have someone who wishes to speak with you." The image shifted, and Chun felt his heart stop standing. Beside the Dragon Queen was a young girl. She was perhaps 10 years old, with dark, curly hair and brown skin, and she was wearing clothes that looked like a mixture of human and Drakari styles, and standing beside her was a creature out of legend, silver dragon with wings like frozen moonlight and eyes like deep ocean water. "Hello," the girl said with a small wave. "My name is Alara Vance, and I was on the Lullaby when it crashed 3 years ago." Murmurs spread across the bridge. Everyone knew about the Lullaby. Everyone knew about the survivors who had been taken by the Drakara, but no one had expected this. "I wanted to talk to you before anyone does anything they might regret," Alara continued. "I know you came here ready to fight, and I know the Drakari were ready to fight too, but I do not think fighting is the answer." She looked up at the Queen, and then back at the screen. "I have lived with the Drakari for 3 years now, and I have learned that they are not what we thought they were." "They took you prisoner," Admiral Chun said carefully. "They have held our people captive for 3 years. They saved my life," Alara replied. "And they saved the lives of everyone on the Lullaby. When they could have just destroyed the ship," she put her hand on Velith's neck, "and I saved the life of this dragon when she was just an egg, and now we are bonded together forever." She took a deep breath. "Humans and Drakari have never really tried to understand each other, and we have just assumed that the other side was the enemy. But what if we are wrong? What if instead of fighting we tried to be friends?" Admiral Chun stared at this small girl who spoke with such conviction, and he felt something shift in his chest. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" Queen Surith stepped forward, and her voice filled the communication channel. "I am proposing something that has never happened in the 12,000-year history of my empire," she said. "I am proposing an alliance." Gasps echoed across every ship in the human fleet. "The survivors of your vessel will be returned to you immediately," Surith continued. "And I am opening the borders of the Scorian Nebula to human vessels. More than that, I am offering the Terran Confederacy a partnership, and together our species could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone." "Why?" Admiral Chun asked. "Why would you offer this after thousands of years of isolation?" Surith looked down at Alara. "Because a child taught me something I had forgotten," she said. "She taught me that strength is not only found in fire and scale, and sometimes the greatest strength is found in compassion." She returned her gaze to the screen. Your species is fragile, Admiral, and you live such brief lives, and your bodies are soft and easily broken. But there is something in you that we Drakari have lost somewhere across the millennia. This child nearly died to save an egg that was not her own from a species that she had every reason to fear. She asked nothing in return and expected nothing, and she did it simply because she could not bear to let something helpless die alone. That is a kind of strength that the universe has never seen before. Cirith spread her wings, and for a moment she looked less like a conqueror and more like something else entirely. "You humans burn so bright," she said, "and you burn so briefly, but in that burning, you create light that can reach even the darkest places. I would like to see what happens when that light joins with our fire." Admiral Chun was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He smiled. "Your Majesty," he said, "I think we would like to see that too." The negotiations that followed took weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The survivors of the Lullaby will return to their families. The borders of the Scorian Nebula were opened for the first time in recorded history, and the Drakari Empire and the Terran Confederacy signed the Treaty of Two Flames, which established the first alliance between the Dragon people, and Humanitalara stood beside Queen Cirith. When the treaty was signed with Valith at her side, she watched as human and Drakari leaders shook hands and exchanged pledges of friendship, and she felt hope blooming in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. 20 years later, Elara Vance stood in a very different place. She was no longer a child, but a woman grown tall and strong with the same kind eyes she had always had. She wore the robes of the first human ambassador to the Drakari Empire, and she served as a bridge between two civilizations that had learned to trust each other. Valith had grown as well. The silver dragon was now one of the most magnificent drakes of her generation, with wings that could carry them both across entire continents. Their bond had never weakened. If anything, it had grown stronger with each passing year. Together, they had helped build something incredible. Human colonies now existed within Drakari space, and Drakari visitors walked openly on human world. Scientists from both species worked together to unlock the secrets of the universe. Artists created works that blended the aesthetics of fire and flesh, and children grew up in a galaxy where they could dream of friendships that crossed the boundaries of species. On the day of the 20th anniversary of the Treaty of Two Flames, a ceremony was held in the throne room on Perithian Prime Queen. Cirith still sat on the throne of cinders, for she would live for thousands of years more. But she was not alone anymore. Beside her stood Elara and Valith, and behind them stood representatives of both their peoples united in celebration. And on the wall above the throne hung a painting. It showed a small girl with dark curly hair, clutching an egg in her arms, standing before a massive dragon queen in a throne room of fire and shadow. The plaque beneath it read, "She did not conquer with armies, and she conquered with warmth." Cirith looked at the painting, and then at the woman who had once been that small girl. "You changed everything, you know." "The Utend," Queen said quietly. Ella smiled. "We changed everything together, Your Majesty." She looked out at the crowd of humans and Drakari celebrating together, and she thought about her parents, who had given their lives so that she could live. She hoped they would be proud. She hoped they could see what their sacrifice had made possible, a galaxy where fire and flesh could exist side by side, where ancient power and young hope could learn from each other, where a human child and a dragon egg could become something greater than either could have been alone. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities that no one had ever imagined. It had all begun with a simple choice, a choice to hold on to an egg in the dark, a choice to believe that kindness was stronger than fear, a choice that changed everything forever.